This is so shocking, of course, to everybody watching.
I've never seen anything like it. It literally blew itself into World Trade Center.
Obviously now we move from what appears to have, there it is right there.
Again, I'm looking from...
This was the scene on September 11th when members of Al-Qaeda executed one of the largest instances of terror on American soil. 19 militants flew 2 planes into the World Trade Center towers in New York City, triggering major U.S. efforts to fight terrorism.
On September the 11th, enemies of freedom committed an act of war against our country. All of this was brought upon us in a single day, and night fell on a different world, a world where freedom itself is under attack. Americans have many questions tonight. Americans have many questions tonight. Americans are asking, who attacked our country? The evidence we have gathered all points to a collection of loosely affiliated terrorist organizations known as Al-Qaeda.
Al-Qaeda, led by a man named Osama bin Laden, was driven by an extremist interpretation of Islam that led to a hatred of all Americans and other Western countries. Through their goal of wanting to spread their views and the desire for political power, they set out to harm the American people.
America strikes back. Afghanistan is pounded with bombs and missiles from the air and sea.
We are supported by the collective will of the world.
Homeland Security has stepped up to protect against retaliation, and bin Laden himself sends a videotaped threat to the American...
The first step to what is now known as the War on Terror was the war in Afghanistan. This mainly targeted another larger terrorist organization known as the Taliban, which was an Islamic fundamentalist group that ruled Afghanistan from 1996 to 2001. It was targeted because it was known that they were allowing Al-Qaeda refuge within Afghanistan. This was a 13-year war, and during the time another military operation known as Iraqi Freedom began over weapons of mass destruction. These operations were successful in capturing and killing many terrorist leaders. However, even after the removal of troops in 2013, there is still an overwhelming amount of turmoil in the area.
I also want to speak tonight directly to Muslims throughout the world. We respect your faith. It's practiced freely by many millions of Americans and by millions more in countries that America counts as friends. Its teachings are good and peaceful, and those who commit evil in the name of Allah blaspheme the name of Allah. The terrorists are traitors to their own faith.
One important fact that needs to be addressed is that the fight that America engaged in with countries in the Middle East and terrorist groups was not a war against Islam. It was a conflict involving political groups that are loosely associated with the Muslim religion. The actions of these groups do not actually stand for the beliefs of Islam, and therefore it is important to emphasize that these conflicts should not impact the views of Muslim people in the West.
Syria's anti-Assad groups include councils and coalitions, foreign exiles and frontline fighters. All want to see the Syrian president prized from power, but does any one group speak for the others? Syria's opposition leaders mostly live in exile. They go to international meetings and hold a lot of press conferences. Formed in 2012, the National Coalition for Syrian Revolutionary and Opposition Forces was supposed to bring order to the divided anti-Assad movement. The coalition was itself created after the Syrian National Council failed to earn the respect of foreign backers or control troops on the ground. Recognized by some 100 governments, it now occupies Syria's seat at the Arab League and seeks arms and aid from international powers. But some rebels actually fighting the Assad regime inside Syria have now lost patience, saying the coalition has let the diplomatic situation drift dangerously. On the military side, little is clear. The Free Syrian Army has faced fierce government assaults and lacks heavy weapons of its own. Despite the ending of an EU arms embargo, only Saudi Arabia and Qatar are so far known to be arming the rebels. The fractured political leadership is mirrored on the ground, with small units loyal to local commanders rather than one cohesive force. Some of the most successful anti-Assad groups are jihadists, with one, the Al-Nusra Front, openly declaring affiliation to Al-Qaeda. International hopes for a solution in Syria depend on the emergence of a united political opposition. That unity and solution remain elusive.
Out of the fray of the Syrian Revolution, one of the most successful terrorist groups that emerged was ISIS. First, a branch of Al-Qaeda called the AQI established itself in Iraq and then also in Syria during the revolution. They then renamed themselves the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS. In 2014, after the capture of major cities such as Mosul in Iraq, they really gained international notoriety by filming brutal executions such as that of American journalist James Foley and putting them on the internet. Many factors led to the success of the group ISIS, such as their selling of oil to sympathetic countries, feelings of disenfranchisement in many Sunni communities in Iraq and Syria, and the chaos of the Syrian Revolution and continued fighting.
All of this history brings us to two very current modern events. On November 13, 2015, Paris was attacked in over 5 areas. This attack became the highest death toll in France since World War II, with over 128 deaths. ISIS took responsibility with explicit connection to a retaliation against the French involvement in the Syrian airstrikes. These strikes were a part of a United States-led coalition in 2004 with over 10 other countries that conducted airstrikes in Syria, with the purpose to stop ISIS from gaining power in this area. Rather than inspiring more violence, these acts resulted in other countries denouncing the violence that had occurred. As you can see, national monuments in various countries wore the French national colors in solidarity with them. This extended to the Middle Eastern areas as well, where the violence was explicitly denounced by fellow Muslims. Closer to home, the Boston Marathon bombings occurred on April 15, 2013. 2 brothers of Kyrgyzstan origin set off 2 bombs near the Boston Marathon finish line, which killed 3 civilians and injured over 260 people, leaving 16 as amputees. 1 man was on a green card, and the other man was a naturalized citizen. Neither of them were associated with an Islamic group, but were motivated by the ongoing Middle Eastern wars with America, as shown by the younger brother's note left on a boat that said, "Stop killing our innocent people, and we will stop." Despite these facts, mainstream media released documents that stereotype the Islamic population as being conducive to this type of violence. For example, the New York Post released a cover with 2 Moroccan-born citizens with the inference that they were the marathon bombers, simply based off their ethnicity and backpack possession. Regardless, in both cases, it is important to note that countries and Islamic groups alike across the world denounced violence and showed solace for victims after each event.